Welcome to our placement exam training video. The objective of this video is to go through all the parts of the placement exam that both you and the students taking it will see, help you log in, understand and access all the material, look at the tests, grade them, do everything you're going to need to do, and have it in a resource that you can always go back to whenever you need it. If this is your second or more time viewing this video, feel free to skip ahead to the point in time you'd like. Otherwise, please follow along. You'll see on the screen that I've taken us to the Blackboard Learn main page. I've put in my information, of course you'll put in yours, and go ahead and log in. Your page will obviously look a little bit different than mine does, but you want to move your cursor up here to Organizations at CCSU and click on that. And in this section, you will see the placement exam class that you've been assigned. This screen will look a little bit different than mine does, but yours will have something designated. If you're confused or having trouble finding something at this point, please let me know. And you can email me or just come by my office. What I'm going to do is take us to this thing called the sandbox, which is essentially a draft outline and editable version of our placement exam, but will serve a useful purpose for us today as the model of what we're actually going to be using. And what this takes us to is the introduction and instructions page that all students will see when they begin taking the test. So, we're at the very beginning of the exam. Let's take a look around and familiarize ourselves with what we're seeing. In the left column are the different sections of the exam process. We're here on step 1. After the introduction and instructions comes a demographic and self-assessment survey, the actual exam itself, a quick post-survey, and eventually their results. You can access any section you want at any time by clicking on these directly, but the default beginning is here with step 1. If you scroll up and down, what you'll see are a lot of different documents. We'll go through them individually, but this contains all of the information that you and the students need to know. We're being very transparent about everything. That way we can ensure that the students taking the exam fully understand what they're being asked and are answering to the best of their ability. Please note that at any time, if any student or you has any question, my information is always available as I'm the contact person for this. Here's my name, here's my email address. So let's move on to the actual introduction page. If we scroll down, you'll notice that under each of these documents, it reminds students they can click on the link here to get the actual document, and they are free, as you are, to save the document to your computer and to print it out if you wish. Let's take a look at the introduction by clicking on it here. Here is, well, an introduction. It lets students know that they're going to read something of about 500 words and write something of a similar length, that they'll have 2 hours to read the text provided and to compose, edit, and submit their essay. It's important to note, and this is stated several times, including on the previous page, that the 2-hour counter only applies to the written exam itself and not to reading any of these documents or to the survey. Feel free to read through this introduction. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you note them so you can let me know. Otherwise, let's go back to Blackboard Learn. Continuing our journey through the introduction, let's take a look at the assessment policies for our exam. We let students know that their essay is only going to be evaluated by our trained writing faculty in our department, that they're evaluated on their specific responses to the actual prompts they're given, and according to the criteria, which we'll look at shortly, reminding students that they should stay on topic, as even if they write the world's greatest free-form essay, they will still fail it if it's off-topic and irrelevant, and of course our policy on plagiarism. If you have questions about plagiarism or the research behind how it applies to this kind of exam, you can let me know, but I'll just give you the brief summary now that both research and common sense suggests that copying plagiarism and online research in a timed writing exam like this is both useless and counterproductive. Useless in the sense that in the time they have, they probably won't find a specific essay on this specific topic, and even if they were to find something that would fit our criteria and our question, the ultimate reward they get is being placed in a class for which they are unprepared, which will only hurt them later, both in grades and in progress towards degree. Once you're done reviewing this material, head on back to the main page and we'll move along. Now let's click on Assessment Criteria. These are the three main characteristics we're going to evaluate students' writing. The first one, controlling idea, is another way of thinking about a thesis, a claim, a topic, a line of inquiry, a central purpose, and so forth. This is a familiar concept, I think, both to anyone who's taught writing, but also to our students. And in our writing prompts, we're always very clear to articulate for our students what exactly we're asking and why we're asking it. So we feel very confident in asking students to respond specifically with a main purpose. The second thing we're looking for is the way that they use the text or cite it. Obviously, this is a characteristic and skill that's going to come in handy in college-level writing, and we ask students, again, specifically in the prompt, to make use of the text in very particular ways. Finally, and keeping in mind that this is a 2-hour timed exam for students who have not yet entered CCSU, we are going to look at the style, tone, and mechanics of student writing. We'll discuss this more when we meet in person to do our actual norming, but it's important to be aware of the fact that students need to write for a specific audience. Sometimes we call this academic discourse, sometimes it's genre or style, but we do have an expectation both of formality and of the ability to put together sentences and words and make choices that are both purposeful and effective towards meeting their goals. And in this criterion, we aim to do just that. As I said, we will not only talk about these more in our second part of our training, but practice them and work them out together. However, if you have any questions or concerns about these, please note them down so we can talk about these at a later date. Once you're done looking through these criteria, head on back to the main page and we'll move along. If we scroll down, we'll see that grading scale is next. This document lets students know on what terms they'll be graded for each criterion. This is a fairly standard Likert 5-point scale, although ours goes from 0 to 4 instead of 1 through 5. And in conjunction with the three criteria we've just looked at, allows us to determine on a scale of 0 to 12 how effective our students' writing is. Obviously, how we apply a term like satisfactory or good to a particular criterion requires training and an actual exam to look through. We'll be doing that in the second part of our training. If you have any questions or concerns about this, as always, please note them. Once you're done looking through this document, and again, I'll note that all of these documents are accessible to our students both before the exam and during. Head on back and we'll continue with our tour. What do you get when you combine grading criteria with a number scale? A rubric, which is a joke that sounded a lot funnier in my head than it does out loud. In any event, we can see our three criteria here, our 5 grading outcomes here, and what we've put in these boxes are essentially ways of identifying what, for example, a satisfactory use of text and citation is. Now, these descriptions, while helpful and very useful in us determining the difference between, say, diminished and satisfactory in a particular criterion, are of course less meaningful in a context absent of student writing. Thus, we'll be using this extensively and practice using it when we meet for our second part of our training, but familiarizing yourself with it now can be helpful. And moreover, this is particularly helpful to our students as they can use it to determine and self-assess the writing they're doing as they do it and before they submit it. It also ensures that students understand they're being graded not on a subjective or hidden scale, but on an objective and transparent rubric that, if it doesn't at least make sense, is clear and consistent between students. Take a minute to look through these grid, and when you're done, head on back. Our next document down the list is placement outcomes. And as you might imagine, when students get a score, they're going to wonder what it means, and you'll probably wonder too. So we have this nifty document here. There's a couple distinguishing features that it's important to go over. First, anyone who gets a 7 or higher and no score of inadequate gets placed into 110. So remember, there's 12 total points. A 7 or higher gets a student into 110. A score of 5 or 6 and a score of inadequate or 0 in no more than one criterion qualifies a student to take English 105 and 105P, our 5-credit embedded remediation course. and a score total of below 5, that means 4 or lower, must take English 099 before being eligible to take English 110. So to go over this again, 7 or higher is 110, 5 or 6 is 105, and 4 or below is English 099. Some other notes: students whose essays indicate writing difficulties related to not being a native speaker of English may be placed in ESL 108-109 instead of 099. That will be a decision made by the student in conjunction with either me or our director of composition. A number of other things which I or the director of composition may decide: a student who tests into 110 but would prefer 105 may be given the option to do so, and a number of these other characteristics here which you can read through on your own. If you have questions about this, definitely let me know. Really, the important part here are these three. Once you're done reviewing this document, head back to our main section and scroll up, and we'll move along to Step 2, the Demographic and Self-Assessment Survey, Part 1. All right, so we've made it through Step 1. And again, when students are done looking at everything, they see scroll up and select Step 2, Demographic and Self-Assessment Survey Part 1 from the left column. So we'll just do that now. And here we are, Demographic and Self-Assessment Survey Part 1. This survey is here to help us gather information on students. Their names are not gathered as part of that information, so whatever we get is anonymous, and it's completely separate from grading information. Therefore, you probably won't ever see this information. It's really here for me and for our department in order to understand who our students are and make sure that we're properly serving them. But it is important information that we gather, so we do ask students to do it. A couple other important notes. We think it takes about 10 to 15 minutes. They can stop and start whenever they like, and the time they spend on the survey will not count against their 2 hours. Remember, that timer has not yet started for them. So let's take a look at this survey. We won't go through every single question, but we'll go through it a little bit. Their first question asks what they consider their primary language to be, and this list is randomized, so for each student it will come up in a different order. There's also an other answer in the event that this doesn't carry their particular language or dialect. This question asks what the primary language or languages used in their home are. This question asks if students are fluent in a language other than English. If their household speaks a primary language other than English, this is where they indicate that. Here we can find out what level of English our students in high school took, or our students took when they were in high school. Fun story. I was in remedial English in high school, and I resented it greatly. This is perhaps the most fun and the most interesting question for me. This asks students what their strengths and weaknesses as a writer in English are. One of the characteristics of a strong writer is the ability for him or her to accurately assess their strengths and weaknesses. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, but until you know what they are, you can't adequately marshal them or respond to them. So by finding out how effective our students are at this, we can better adapt our curriculum to match. This question asks students what they hope to learn and to improve upon in a composition course, which can give us insight into their confidence level and what their expectations of college writing are, whether or not they're accurate. And finally, this question asks students, based on the course descriptions of all of our writing courses, what they think, essentially, they should be in when they arrive in college. Generally speaking, most students, I think, will choose English 110, whether or not that's accurate. And we will ask them again, as you'll see in a few moments, after they take the exam, what class they think they should be in. Students will then save and submit. Of course, here I haven't done that, so it's just giving me a little error message. Don't worry. We'll move along. They get their result, and we can go back here to the demographic and self-assessment page where we started. At this point in time, students would then move on to the placement examination. So we'll do that too. Click here, and we'll dive into the test. So We've already looked through the introduction and instructions. We've taken a look at the first part of the demographic and self-assessment survey. Now we're going to look at the exam itself. And here are the instructions students get before they proceed. This is where they get their, again, warning that they have 2 hours to take the exam. So make sure they have the next 2 hours completely free. They are not allowed to stop and restart. It's done in one sitting. So whatever they need to do to be comfortable, ready to go, they should take care of that now. It also reminds students to go back and any of the documents they want in introduction instructions, they should go get. Again, asks students to continue to make sure that they're ready to go. Lets them know that the timer is going to start soon. And so let's proceed. Don't mind this message here. This is just because I was testing it before, but you can see that if a student somehow forgets to hit the submit button, the exam will still be submitted, and it's set up that way. So the worst thing that can happen to them is that they submit a test that they didn't actually mean to, as opposed to working really hard on something and having it all disappear. And I can manually go in and fix things if there are problems, but for now, we'll just move through. So the test has not yet begun yet. This is just a reminder of some things. When a student hits begin, it will begin. Now, I'm not an actual student, so what's not happening here is there's no timer, and you can see the timer does not appear when previewing this test. But there would be a timer up on the screen, and it would always be visible, letting students know. And they get specific warnings when there's an hour left, 5 minutes, 1 minute, and 30 seconds. When the timer runs out, the test is automatically submitted, so they can't not turn it in. And it's important to know that there are 3 different questions, and in our norming session, we will look at each of the questions and responses to them. It will randomly select one of the questions to use. So students don't know exactly what they're going to get before they do, but all of the questions are very similar in topic and in tone and in length, and the instructions for them are identical, as well as the response prompts are very, very similar. This one is an excerpt from an autobiography written by Mike Rose. The instructions otherwise are identical to the other questions. Here's the begin reading cue, and this is the actual reading itself. You can read through it if you like. At the end of the reading, they will all see this. They will have 2 questions. The first question will always ask students to briefly summarize what they've just read. And the second question will ask students to respond to a specific and analytic question. In this case, and you can read for yourself, it asks students to respond to Rose's essay by, well, responding to this question. Why does he describe the education and his classmates in the manner he chooses? Beyond agreeing or disagreeing, which is a phrase that appears in all 3 of our questions, how would you respond to Ken Harvey's statement that he just wants to be average? One of the things we're trying to evaluate in our test is how well students can break beyond a very typical summarize, I agree, I disagree, this is what it means type of a writing, and instead perform original, creative, thoughtful analysis in which they respond while considering the larger stakes of a situation. Again, students haven't been through college education. Many of our students and many of the students taking this test are non-native English speakers, so we get a wide range of responses. But it's important that the test we offer finds out whether students can already succeed with instruction in a class like 110, or if they're not yet prepared to learn and discover and practice the kinds of skills that we're looking for. And we'll talk about that more in the second part of our training. There's also 5 pieces of advice which are included in the test, just common sense things for students. And they'll put their response into this box. If they want, they can use Microsoft Word, they can write it out, they can do whatever they want, but ultimately their answer needs to be copy and pasted into this box. Once they do that, or once the timer runs out, right, here it says it's incomplete because I didn't put anything in. So here, this is my awesome answer. I am the best. Not a very effective response. Nonetheless, this asks to confirm it. And done. I have taken the test. Time, date. I used 3 minutes. If I need to review, I can do so. And since we're all done here, let's take a look at the post-assessment. So, they've submitted the essay and we've congratulated them because we're nice people. But we are going to ask them to respond to just a few more questions. As you might remember, at the end of step 2, we asked students this question: where do they think they place? Well, now that they've taken the test and submitted their response, we want to ask them again. And there's a lot of interesting data that this uncovers. Student expectations, pre and post anxieties, some kind of normalization after having looked at what a real prompt might look like, and so forth. Nonetheless, interesting data. And question 2 asks why they think they'll be placed into the class they've just responded to. So, very quick, only 2 questions. At this point, they're sick of us and want to be done. They save and submit. Yes, I know they're incomplete. And done. And that's it. They're over with at this point. If we go back and look to see what step 4 said, it reminded students that when they finish the survey, they can safely close all windows. They'll be contacted once their score, etc., etc. And I am the contact point person for all questions. So even if you're the one grading it, I'm the one who's going to get the questions, which is the way it should work. And if I need to follow up with you, I certainly will. In any event, you see here, there's this last part, placement result. We're not students, so we're not going to have a placement result. But this is the whole test. This is what they see. This is what they get. I'm going to embellish it and make it look prettier over time, but this is the bare bones part. At this point, we're going to move on to how to grade an actual test. So if you want to review any of this introductory material, please feel free. Otherwise, let's move along. All right, so how do you actually grade the exam? Good question. If we scroll down, you'll find in the left column this thing. It says Grade Center. You want to click on the first option that says Needs Grading. And here you'll see all the students that have taken tests that are assigned to you. And everybody will have different students and so forth, but you'll see all the ones that you've got. What's important to keep in mind is that you're going to see a lot of things with the same name. That's because for reasons beyond our technical working, all of the demographic and self-assessment stuff also shows up here. You don't want to look at that. You want to make sure that when you look at somebody's placement exam, you're not judging them based on what you think or what they've responded, that their native languages and so forth. We're grading them on how well they responded to the prompt based on our criteria and for no other reason and no other criteria. If you suspect when you read an answer that the student might benefit from an ESL course, go ahead and drop me a line, send me an email, talk with me about it, but that shouldn't be something that influences the way you score their exam at all. So make sure you're looking for placement exam, and you found this troublemaker here who's taken his. We click on his name, and lo and behold, we get the response. What you'll see is a couple things. First of all, keep this in mind up here in the right-hand corner. Click on this button that says View Rubric, and you get the rubric with all the points. We're going to put this to the side for a moment. You'll see here's a prompt, the prompt to which I responded. The questions, they're there for you. And here in this space that says Given Answer will be the student's response. I wrote very little here. I'm not very good at writing. I didn't take it seriously. I ran out of time. I wrote text, text, text. Text is fun. All of the text is here. If you're lucky, I've spelled everything correctly and even bothered to use punctuation. Obviously, I deserve to place into 110, so don't even bother thinking this through. Well, unfortunately, little Lee did not do what he was told to do. And we go through this rubric and decide how he did. There's no controlling idea here. He used none of the text, and forget about it. His tone is completely inappropriate. There's room here you'll see for feedback. You can if you want, but the bottom line is it's probably a bad habit to get into leaving comments onto why they got their test grade. If they respond or have a problem with it, they'll come to me, and I will then talk to you and look at the exam itself. But it will just take too much time for you to go through and give that much feedback. So again, when you're done, you've clicked on what you're giving them, hit save, And you'll see it'll automatically add up the points and put them in here for you. You don't have to manually add in the score. This student got a 0 because he did very poorly. But let's say he had done something else. Let's say he had gotten all 2s. See how it puts a 6 in here. When you're all done, well, you can do save and next, and it'll take you on to the next one. But let's do save and exit. We're done here. So you know you've done it when the test no longer appears in the needs grading section, right? It was successfully edited, and it's disappeared. And you know you're done grading when the only thing left in needs grading are the self-assessment surveys and nothing else. You want to make sure that your grade was entered in correctly and that everything went well by going to the full grade center here in the left column. And you'll see yours might be scrolled over to the left. This will have the list of all of the tests you've graded, when you looked at them and so forth. Scroll all the way to the right. You'll see the column for placement exam, and there's the grade. Just that simple. If you have problems, if you enter the wrong grade in, if you're unsure about what grade you want to give, in all of those situations, you should contact me and not try editing anything on your own. It's not that I don't trust you, it's that we want to make sure everything flows through me so we're all aware of what the situation is so that nothing gets changed accidentally or without anyone's knowledge. And so nothing happens that we don't understand, and that way we don't have any trouble with the administration or the students. And frankly, you shouldn't have to be responsible for more than you already are. All you need to do is put these grades in. If, and this will be the last thing, you remember way back in the introduction and instructions, we scroll down to placement outcomes. You remember here, students earning a placement test score of 7 or higher and no score of inadequate in any criterion qualify to take English 110. Well, however unlikely it is possible technically, mathematically, for a student to receive 2 4s and a 0 and get an 8, or a 4 and a 3 and get a 7. That would seem to indicate that the student has placed into 110. However, because of this caveat, no score of inadequate in any criterion, they would not. In a situation like that, if it should happen, which it has not yet, and I highly doubt, however, if it happens, please contact me. Write me an email, let me know the student's name and the situation of their score. And that's it. That's the whole test. That's what you got to do. When you're all done with your exams, you're done. If you want to you should check back regularly to needs grading and see if any new exams have come in. Students tend to take them on their own time. We try to prompt them and remind them to do it, but they come in here. So it's a good idea, particularly in the spring and the summer, to check. And in April and May, we're going to ask you to check daily, if not multiple times a week. Later on, it'll be a lot easier, but we'll go over that in session 2 of our training. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been useful to you. Remember, you can go back to it at any time for any help in any section that you want. And of course, you can ask me any question about this that you like. My email address, come to my office. I don't recommend my office phone because I don't know how to use it, and I get voicemails and I don't know how to check them, but I'm in there a whole lot and I respond to email quickly. Thanks very much for your attention, and thanks so much for your support in this placement exam. On behalf of everybody, we appreciate it.